Okay, Sunday when we began Mark 15, we were using this chart to try to see where the different things are happening in the gospel account. We're following Mark's. We may, just from time to time, reference the others. You're welcome to write this down. If you want the PowerPoint, because someone asked Sunday if they could have the chart, I'd be glad to share that with you, but if you don't want it, that's fine too. And again, even though it said Sunday, when you're looking at the trials of Jesus, you can read through those accounts. You can piece them together very differently than I did. You can kind of put a verse here and then a verse there. I'm going with a pretty simplified format and version, and that's what I'm doing again tonight. But we'll just use it as kind of a structure for our discussion. And if we're looking at the crucifixion of Jesus, there's really two main sections that we're going to be looking at here in Mark 15. The first verses 21 through, I think, about 33 are kind of detailing the process of what's going on as Jesus is crucified, and then picking up there and going through about verse, I think, 42, 43 is the death of Jesus and what happens kind of right at the time that he dies. But of course, there's other things that are going on as well. And remind ourselves as well that this has been a day that, of course, Jesus had been on trial more or less all night. He had been arrested in the garden. He had been taken to the house of Annas. He had been taken to the house of Caiaphas. He sees Peter deny him 3 times. But then early that following morning is when the council reconvenes or convenes again, or the whole council convenes. They bring Jesus to Pilate. And for 3 hours, there's a lot going on. There's this trial before Pilate. There's a trial before Herod. There's questionings going on. There's appeals being made to the crowd. There's the crowd demanding the release of Barabbas instead of Jesus and to crucify Jesus. There's the scourging of Jesus. All these things are going on in a very small window of time. Well, about the ninth hour, sorry, not the ninth hour of the day, about the 6th hour, nope, not getting that right either, about the 3rd hour of the day. I don't operate in different scales very well. So, Jewish 3rd hour of the day, about our 9 a.m., is when this process of crucifixion begins. And it begins with Jesus carrying his cross. This, by the way, is not something that was an exception for Jesus. You read accounts of Roman authors, and they will talk about how it was the fate of the condemned to bear their cross, to carry their cross. And so this was something that every crucified person, for whatever distance it was going to be, they would carry this implement of their death. And I think you probably have read this and studied this as well. It's not the picture of Jesus carrying this 2-piece cross on his back. There's probably one piece of the cross that he's carrying that will then be affixed to the other piece of the cross where he is crucified. Crucifixion is not something that is unheard of in Jerusalem either. When Rome basically conquered Judah, when Titus subjugated the Jews, there were hundreds upon hundreds of Jews who were crucified. And there are accounts that talk about how there was almost shortages of trees to be able to crucify the number of people that were crucified. So this is something that the people are familiar with. The gospel accounts draw attention to this fact that Simon is compelled to carry Jesus' cross. Anyone want to speculate as to why? There may be a couple of reasons here.
Possibly he was beaten to the point that he was unable because of physical ability to do it.
Yeah. That's the likely indication here is why this happens. But I also wonder in my own mind, is it just the events of the last day? There's interesting studies in kind of how the crucifixion has been depicted in art. And for the first 700 years, Christians did not depict the crucifixion in art. They didn't do that. You're in a society, in a culture where crucifixion is the lowest form of death bestowed on criminals and slaves. You don't herald that, you don't celebrate that in your art. But when the empire becomes Christian, so to speak, then that kind of changes. Well, at first in their art, the crucifixion depicts this emaciated Jesus, this tortured figure that would be almost unrecognizable as a man. That is not the art you have likely seen of a crucified Jesus, though. There's a shift where the crucifixion is almost romanticized, and you had this European Jesus on a cross, and guess what? He looks like a man. What does Jesus say of his own existence? What does he say about the kind of life that he lived? What does he say when there are those who want to follow him? And what does he say about his daily living and where he's sleeping at night? The Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. So it's almost as if we can get this picture of here's this kind of healthy, whole person who just kind of gets arrested and put on trial, and he's beaten, and he's had a kind of a bad go of it for the last day. And I'm thinking that Jesus is probably, from a physical stature, already a wreck by the time he's arrested. That's just me, and that's just speculation, but it kind of fits with the kind of life that he has lived. And you take on to that all the cares and concerns that he's had, and the anguish and the sorrow that he's had in the garden, and of course all these beatings, not just the scourging, but the beatings that have been going on for the last 6 to 9 hours probably. And you have a man who is at the limits of physical possibility. The body has been through basically all it can go through at this point. So yes, that's of course the first reason. Jesus is unable to carry the cross. There is, however, one other reason, possibly anyway. It mentions Simon is the father of Alexander and Rufus. And as Michael and Micah in the beginning of this class are talking about a possible Roman audience for the book of Mark, well, you hear about a Rufus that Paul acknowledges in Romans. And it is thought, highly possible, that this Simon that is compelled to carry the cross of Jesus is the father of this Rufus that would be known to the saints in Rome. There is also the matter, of course, of what does Jesus say about those who wish to follow him? Passages like Mark 8:34. What must they do? Deny themselves, pick up the cross, follow me. We won't do a whole sermon on this, but you, like me, have heard and probably used this from the standpoint, okay, I have a burden in life. I have a difficulty in life. That's my cross to bear. I just need to shoulder it on and just follow Jesus. When Jesus carries the cross, it is that death is following. He will die. This life is over. And in the context of what Jesus is beckoning his followers to do, he's saying, you've got to do the same thing. One life is over. This life you had before me, it's over. You're carrying your cross now. But we're not going to dwell on one verse too terribly long tonight, so let's carry on here. In Luke's account, Jesus has some words here to those who are mourning him and talking about how they need to weep for Jerusalem and weep for those who are going to witness these kind of tragedies. We're not going to go there. But when we get into verse 22, we kind of have this procedure of crucifixion. Someone read for me verses 22 through 28, if you would. Mark 15, 22 through 28. Michael, go ahead.
Then they brought him to the place Golgotha, which is translated place of a skull. They tried to give him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him and divided up his garments among themselves, casting lots for them to decide what each man should take. It was the third hour when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." They crucified two robbers with him, one on his right and one on his left. And the scripture was fulfilled, which says, "And he was numbered with transgressors."
Thank you. We're not going to, there are debates on, of course, where the crucifixion happened. The only thing we know, it would have happened in a public place. And trying to necessarily affix the exact location is not something we're going to try to do. But as we're going to see here later on, there are those who are passing by. And the Romans always crucified people in a public place where others would be traveling by for the express reason of this is a warning. This is not only a punishment doled out to one who has done wrong in the Roman eyes. This is also a warning to all those who may contemplate doing likewise. What I want you to see in this, when you look at this crucifixion process, everything about it is meant to mock Jesus. Starting with what they offer him to drink. Here is wine mixed with myrrh. Now, for a while there, and I had read this, that there's this idea that this was a mercy extended to the condemned. Proverbs speak about giving wine to those who were going to die. Myrrh doesn't have any analgesic properties to it, to my understanding.
What is myrrh?
It's a fragrance, an aroma, a spice that kind of, that's the best explanation I can give. Will, do you have a better explanation for that? Okay. So my understanding is wine mixed with something like myrrh or other perfumes is a delicacy. It's something given to a king. Jesus is being offered something that, well, you're a king. Here you go. Here's a kingly drink. He's then crucified, and what, of course, is written, inscribed, and placed over his head. Jesus, King of the Jews. They are mocking him. Everything they do is mocking him. Why is it that they put two criminals, and this is again one of those times, even Mark refers to them as robbers, but kind of given the context of what else we've read, they too are likely insurrectionists, probably insurrectionists who were apprehended when Barabbas was apprehended. Probably a part of the same insurrection. So here is Jesus, King of the Jews, crucified, not on the side, not kind of out here on his own, but no, there are two other criminals on either side of him. Well, he's a failed leader. The insurrection's put down. And this is a... So everything in this is meant to mock who Jesus is. King of the Jews. An insurrection that failed. Yes, John.
A few years ago, when Barry Britnell was here talking about biblical archaeology, he mentioned Bible History Center in LaGrange, Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And we had the occasion to go there a couple of years ago. And it was developed by an archaeologist who at that time was still over the Middle East his whole livelihood. So it's based on good research. And one of the things that he had created at this center was recreation So the people who were mocking him would have been almost in his face. He wasn't 6 feet up in the air, at least according to the thoughts of this archaeologist. So that goes along with what you're saying with the mocking.
There's another reason why they did that. Crucifixion is meant to be torture. That's the purpose. You die by torture. Well, granted, we read the gospel accounts, and it seems, at least for a good amount of the time, there's people around. Well, what happens to a body hanging when it's left alone? Birds and dogs. You put the cross low so the dogs can get to it. Put it just high enough so the criminal can't possibly, reach down, or if he could anyway with his feet affixed. But they're put low for a reason. As they're alive, they're being eaten. So, hey, tell your kids that one tonight and, make them feel good. Yeah. So, but by the way, that's an interesting thing. And kind of the restraint of the gospel writers here, Mark just says, and they crucified him. And I'm not going to go into the whole process of how a person dies on the cross and all the procedures that are going on in his lungs and his muscles. You can read about that. You can read the horrors of that. Mark just says they crucified him. His audience knew what that was. And it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. But that's what they do to him. That's what they do to insurrectionists that failed. That's what they do to criminals. And the Romans were expert at it. Let's see. I think there was one more thing here that I wanted to touch on. Yeah. So it's after this, according to Luke's account, that you have Jesus' first words from the cross. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. As they've done everything they can in this torturous process to not only inflict pain on him physically, but to do it in a way that mocks the very idea of who he is. Father, forgive them, they know not what to do. All right, let's go now to verses 29 through 32, because here's more of the process, the mocking. I want to spend a few minutes on this. Volunteer, go ahead and read for us verses 29 through 32. Caleb?
And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "Aha, you who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." So also the chief priests with the scribes mocked him to one another, saying, "He saves others, he cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." Those who were crucified with him also reviled him.
We're not going to, and we'll even just go ahead and put it up there, what happens next. Luke's account, the criminal who acknowledges Jesus is saved, that's in Luke's account. Mark is giving this account, and I think for this reason. It just adds to the degradation of this whole process. Everything about the process is meant to mock, and now here are the people who come to just mock. Now, Caleb, your version said in verse 29, degraded? Is that what it said? Derided, sorry. The New American Standard says hurling abuse. Anyone have a different translation for what they're doing in verse 29? Blaspheming. Which, of course, irony, what is Jesus' crime to the Jews? He has blasphemed God. Now, here are those, and again, you get the public aspect of it. It's just those who are passing by. We're even told they were trying to get there. They're just passing by. But here they see Jesus. They know who he is. They know some things that he's said, some claims that he's made. And here is clearly failure. There's no way anything that he said is coming to pass. So what can they do? They can deride him. They can hurl abuse at him. They can blaspheme him. Let's look at the mocking, though. And I want you to kind of look at, again, just kind of irony. Look at what they say And how is it kind of ironic? So look at what the first group says. You who are going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross. What's the irony there, if you will? Chase? Can't come down from the cross, or else he's not going to be able to rebuild the temple. He has to stay on the cross because that's how the temple is destroyed and then ultimately rebuilt. Okay? Then look at the next group. In the same way, and Mark does note, okay, we've got the chief priests and the elders there, or the scribes there. So they are going to have particular fun at Jesus' expense here. And they're mocking and said, he saved others, he cannot save himself. What's the irony in the statement?
They admitted that he was saving others.
Okay, there's that.
They wouldn't admit it at the time he wasn't being crucified.
Okay. What's the other aspect of the irony here, though? He cannot save himself. How is that related to him saving others?
Because he was saving others by giving up.
That's it. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Yes, Michael.
And in the first set of people, even misquoting to begin with, he did not say he was going to destroy the temple. He
Said, destroy this
"Destroy
temple."
the
Yeah.
And I will. The irony to me in that point is also, he never said he was going to. They were doing exactly what they claimed he was going to do. They were destroying the temple.
Yeah, good point. Good point. One other, verse 32. Let this Christ, the King of Israel, now come down from the cross so that we may see and believe. What's the irony of the statement there? Come down, and just like the Pharisees had requested a sign so we can believe in you, they're saying, you come down, that'll be a sign to us, and we'll believe in you. What's the irony of the statement? I'm thinking, in my mind, just so you know, that, I'm not trying to fish blindly here. I'm thinking of Jesus' conversation with Nicodemus. And what does he say about the serpent in the wilderness? So must the Son of Man be lifted up. And what happens when the Son of Man is lifted up? So that people can believe on him and have eternal life. Why is he on the cross? Ultimately, this will be the means that people can believe in him. So they are all mocking him. And of course, not understanding that all their mocks, all their taunts, actually strike at the heart of what he came to do in the first place. Again, Mark does not go into the criminal that then changes, has a change of heart, repents, and turns to Christ. Mark is just setting a scene of, again, humiliation, mockery, debasement. Even the criminals who are undergoing all the physical torture that Jesus is undergoing, they're not undergoing a mockery. And they are hurling abuse on him. There is no one left. Any other thoughts, comments, questions before we move on? Yes, Kenny.
Whenever I read things like this, it's easy for me to say, boy, those idiots that did this. And I think the big sin that they had was they didn't treat Jesus as who he was, because they never examined who Jesus was. And we do the same thing, because we don't treat Jesus for who he is, and we mock him. And to a certain extent, I mean, we give him reason to be crucified. I'm sorry for the sermon, but
No, I mean, that's application. That's self-reflection. And There's a reason why the Gospels put this here. Yes, it is our means of understanding what Jesus came to do and ultimately believing in Him because of His resurrection. But then, why did He do this? It's your sin and my sin. So if we don't get that point from these things, then we've missed the point. Let's, though, continue on. Verse 33, let me make sure I haven't. 33 through 37. When the 6th hour came, darkness fell over the whole land until the 9th hour. The 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is translated, my God, why have you forsaken me? And when some of the bystanders heard, they began saying, behold, he is calling for Elijah. Someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine and put it on a reed and gave him a drink, saying, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down. And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. 6th hour, noon, 9th hour, 3 p.m. So there's one aspect that this darkness over the land, it's drawing our attention to something unnatural is occurring as Jesus' death is occurring. You don't have darkness over the whole land from noon to 3 p.m. But I think there's also another aspect to it, because right after Mark says there's darkness over the land, and at that point, Jesus cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Well, let me ask you, what's the point of the darkness? I didn't hear it.
God turning his back on his son, and the light of the world being taken away.
I think that's present here. There's darkness over the land. God, the Father of lights, is not shining on His Son. Now, I will confess here, Jesus quoting from Psalm 22, verse 1, and as I have even studied and preached Psalm 22, I think there is an element of hope here as well, because Psalm 22 does not end on a defeatist note. It ends with the full acknowledgement that God is ultimately going to vindicate His servant. And even in the statement, my God, it's still His God. It's not somebody else's God. It's not a foreign God. It's my God. So even in the statement, there's an idea of hope. You're still my God. But just as the psalmist has experienced in his mind a separation from God based on everything that he's going through, now Jesus bearing the sin of the world, now Jesus being degraded and mocked and tortured, now Jesus with the light of God no longer shining on him, why have you forsaken me? I do not fully understand all that means. I don't know. Michael does, though.
No, actually not. I was just going to maybe add to that another part of this that I see is possibly evil has had its moment now. You know, we understand the imagery with light and darkness. For a brief moment, Satan is going to bruise the heel. Mm-hmm. He's going to have his moment. But ultimately, that moment is very short-lived, and it's very triumphant for Jesus in the end.
Yeah.
But I don't know, that to me is kind of where my mind goes when I hear darkness. Nature itself is taking a pause that evil has done something terrible, but yet it's only for 3 hours.
Yeah.
Not for an eternity.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Good thought. So, there's this matter of Elijah. And I don't think that's too difficult to understand. You know, we say, oh, Jesus said, my God, why are they asking about Elijah? Well, he's been on the cross 3 hours, longer than 3 hours now, getting on 6 hours. I can't imagine when he says something that is hardly audible at this point. They have heard something. They conclude he's calling for Elijah because there was Jewish literature and testimony that Elijah somehow will come to the aid of God's troubled, God's people, and vindicate them. There were various testimonies to that or writings about that. And so when they're saying, okay, let's give them wine and let's see if Elijah comes, this is more mockery. Let's give him something to drink so he can really call out here, so that Elijah could hear him, and then we'll see if Elijah will come and take him down from the cross. Because that's what Elijah would do for one of God's saints, surely. So that again is mockery. So verse 37 just makes a simple statement. He utters a loud cry and breathed his last. Now, of course, other gospel accounts record other things that Jesus said. Luke 23:46, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. So, again, a recognition from Jesus, his God has not completely forsaken him. He understands, my God is going to receive my spirit. And then John 29 and verse 30, it is finished. The work, the plan, what God has determined has come to pass. Verses 38 and 39 in Mark's account are the accompanying events to Jesus' death. Matthew, of course, has other events, but we're going to focus here on what Mark records. And there's just two, really, that Mark records. There's the tearing of the veil in verse 38. The veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And then there's the testimony of the centurion. There is a thought, and I still am pondering this one. There is a thought that this loud cry of Jesus in verse 37, that's what tears the veil. Will just rolled his eyes, so that's not it. So we'll just pass on from that one. No, there is a thought that this is a show of power at what would seem to be the moment of defeat. And that is how the veil is torn. I don't know. There is discussion about even what veil is being referred to. I think naturally, and it would seem the text would favor this, it's the veil separating the holy from the Holy of Holies. And of course, the Hebrew writer in Hebrews 9 and 10 will talk about the new way inaugurated by Jesus into the presence of God, and so kind of a bearing on this. There are others who think it's the outward veil, the veil that would be seen or more easily seen by others, and that's the veil that tore. And there are even those who think that in this tearing, it's actually when Jesus has talked about the destruction that's going to come upon Jerusalem and the temple in particular, that Jesus in his moment of what would seem to be defeat in this loud cry is showing, no, this is what's coming to an end. Again, I don't know. Mark's account's very brief. All he says is a loud cry, and then the veil tears in two. But it's clearly something that shouldn't happen. It's an extraordinary event. And again, other accounts speak to the importance of that happening. I do want to briefly at least talk about verse 39. When the centurion who was standing right in front of him saw the way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly this man was a son of God." And there's nothing in the text to indicate that the centurion was anything less than sincere. And the centurion, who the only person he would have ever said is the Son of God was Caesar in Rome, has now said of a criminal on a cross, "Truly this is the Son of God." So there is the events and what has happened has struck him as that this man's claims must be true. Mark ends the account of Jesus' crucifixion with this, and I think for this reason. Again, you read the crucifixion, everything is degradation. Everything is mockery. But when it's done, there's exaltation. Jesus enduring crucifixion and all the abuse hurled at him, it ends with a centurion saying, "Truly this is the Son of God." There is exaltation of Jesus at the end. And you'll of course remember, how does Mark's gospel begin? In Mark 1 and verse 1. Jesus, son of Abraham, son of David, son of, well, did I miss it up there? Is it for son of God first? You should know that before you start referencing it. Josh, teaching 101. Mark 1, verse 1. Well, that wasn't it. I was going through Matthew. So Mark 1:1 just says, in the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So see, you clearly ought to read that before you talk about it. But with the centurion's statement, we have come right back to where we began. Yes, Michael?
The way this reads, it says when he saw the way he breathed his last. Could it be that he is witnessing the power that comes with, according to Matthew's gospel, the yielding up of his spirit? The spirit isn't taken away from him. Jesus allows it to leave. And it strikes me the way Mark words it. He said, when he saw the way he breathed his last. It's almost as if in this entire thing, the centurion can see that even though he's on a cross, he's in control.
There's another parallel that may have some bearing here too. When Jesus is baptized and the Spirit descends on him, the text will read that the heavens were opened. It's the idea of a separation of the heavens. The Spirit comes down. Jesus dies, the veil is torn in two. There's a new opening. There's another different opening. And whatever means, and I don't know fully, because again, Mark's account just says he breathed his last. Is there a visible indication, just like the Spirit was visibly seen to descend on Jesus, is there now a visible representation of that leaving him? I don't know, but it could be. Kenny?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this is such an unusual. Jesus is not the first man to be unjustly crucified on a cross, nor the first person to have a bunch of miscarriages of justice. But I think you're right. I mean, the way he died, that it was so unusual that even somebody who was not schooled in Jewish literature recognized that this was not usual. And again, it comes back to they never looked at the claims that Jesus was making. They just always assumed that he was a lunatic. And so they never looked at that he could have been the Son of God. They just directly went to, of course he's not. Therefore, we need to get rid of him.
Yeah. The other parallel with the baptism of Jesus, of course, is as the heavens are open, the Spirit descends, and then God says, "This is my Son." Whereas here, again, the veil opens, is ripped in two. There's a breathing of his last, and now a centurion, a Roman soldier, says, "This is the Son of God." So, all right, that's all we're going to... Oh, yes, Brother Mentor.
Could it be that the centurion was being observant of everything he saw and felt? The light being extinguished from the sky. And I'm supposing here the earthquake, possibly, in the veil.
Sure.
And he experienced this, and he hears him speaking to his father. Why have you forsaken me? And he's just open, and the centurion's saying, sure.
Yeah, I mean, all of that plays into it. All right, thank you very much. Micah, you know where to take up Sunday.